And that's right. You can't fault it.
No, I don't. I mean,
You did.
I'm bringing my old. I'm bringing my old.
Well, and I, when we Richard too, we went to France. Were you there with him? And he was impressed with what he saw. And when we told him how much it cost to build these.
No, he thinks when we say we. Wow. That's pretty good.
Yeah. So that's good. I mean, to get his blessing or approval.
Build a nice house.
And it didn't cost $2 million to build it.
Excuse me? You don't want to consider it all new. It was kind of almost all.
I got some things. I don't know if they're questions, but they're sort of, probes. He may answer them before I'll follow John's lead.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Some of the questions. They put together a nice question. So, hey, thoughts.
Mad anyway.
Oh yeah. No, actually.
You've been a bachelor all
I'm texting her right now.
right, I got it.
I tell her, we're on the air and it shows up. It's live. So yeah, she's how's that? Christmas, she was just here last week. She's out here in April for the summer. But then next
Mike?
How are you, man?
Yeah.
I'm gonna come back.
Except for
I don't know. The die is cast. And we'll find my replacement. Just someone else. No. So
So I just want you guys to know I'm advice to town council. She's assuming it's just one. I guess. And I'm one of them, so it's interesting. I'm sorry. So I'm going to recuse myself from that. I could do one or two things. I could do this voice selecting and ask for like a waiver.
No. We don't get much.
Well,
I mean, I never.
we're kind of far from the harbor, but what the hell?
Yeah, I don't know what. I mean,
Well, you can needed the numbers.
I mean, we can talk about it. I mean, I wouldn't
because it's not more than 10%.
Is this what you notice in the population that's being?
Is that the cutoff? 10%?
I mean, there's like, I forget the number. That's what the same number. It's like 150, 150, it's less than 200.
Just letting you know. It's been a success.
I'm not ignoring you. that's what.
Or you could ask them at the public hearing.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience, and we're glad to see our colleagues from the Nantucket Public Schools here. Looking forward to your presentation. I see representatives of faculty, administration, school board. We're happy to have you here. But I'd like to call the meeting to order. Is there any public comment to come before this committee that is not an item on today's agenda? All right. We have several minutes to approve, and as the committee looks at their agenda, we're going to delete January 16th. We're hardworking, but we didn't actually meet that day, so it just seems like we have. But so we can either take them as a group. Does anybody have any changes, amendments they would like to make to any of these meetings on January 12th, January 14th, January 19th, and January 21st? If not, is there a motion to approve all the minutes?
So moved.
So moved. I heard David and Cliff seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed, no. On the agenda today, we have the fiscal year 2012 school budget. We have the modeling that we'd asked Brian to do on debt financing, and then we're going to continue our discussion of the sewer projects. With that, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can introduce whoever you want, but the floor is yours. We look forward to your presentation every year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the FinCom. We do have a number of the administrative team here with us. Should you ask a question that perhaps I can't answer, I might turn to them with your permission, and they could answer a specific question about a department of the schools or one of the three schools. I'm just going to run through a PowerPoint that will cover both the budget presentation and the capital requests. And should you have questions at any point, be happy to stop. I don't have to just fly through this, but I respect that you have several other agendas that are going to take some time, some of your time this afternoon. Our budget always begins with enrollment. That is what drives our budget, much as the number of people in the community drives the town budget. This gives you an idea of the last 6 years, and you can see that we have steadily increased since the 2011 year from 1330 to 1588. I know I've shared some of these numbers with you in the past. We have generally risen by about 50 students a year, although from 2013 to 2014 it went up almost 100. And our numbers continue to grow. These reflect October 1 counts because that is what the Department of Education requests of us. So you can see each school and then the total. This is an over 20-year look now at enrollment in Nantucket. And I think it's very interesting. If you go back to 1993, 94, we were at 1,000. Today, 1567. And certainly the demographics of our community have shifted significantly. I think people know that intuitively, but when you see it this way, it's a pretty glaring shift for our community, particularly in the last 5 years, 5 to 10 years.
Michael?
Yes, John?
Yeah, I wondered if you care to comment on something here. I noticed that in the last couple of years, particularly the last year, there seems to be in elementary and in in our middle school, there seems to be sort of a flattening out, and particularly last year, there was an increase in the high school. Now, is that an anomaly, or?
Well, we have some bubbles going through the school district, and in fact, next year will probably be the highest number that the high school will experience for some time, because we have a large 8th grade coming in next year. And each 8th grade, we add probably between 10 to 20 students that are coming from the private schools that are joining our 8th grade at the high school. So next year, I expect that number will be quite high. You'll see that 119 at the bottom under grade 12 will be replaced by what appears to be a 129 in 8th grade, but really that 129 will be closer to 145. So when you have those numbers rolling forward, you look at a 4-year roll forward, you can start to see the impact. Fortunately, after that, this year's 8th grade, we have two a little bit smaller classes, 101 and 102, that, again, will have private school added to it, but it won't be up around the 140. It's kind of interesting because 100 is our new abnormal number in terms of being low. That used to be our high number when we had a class that was over 100. And so it's kind of interesting. The wild card every year, of course, is kindergarten. We don't know. We've had a kindergarten registration, but we have so many students register between March and August. So a number that may appear to be 75 right now can easily be 95 and can hit that 125. The year when if you look at the 2nd grade that has 130 this year, I think in the early registration we had about 90 students. 40 students came in over the summer, that summer. So that's a real wild card for us in terms of knowing where we're going to be. I hope that helps. We've also broken down a few subpopulations. This is our English language learners, ELL. You can see I don't have consecutive years, but just enough to give you an idea to show you the growth, even in 10 years or a little bit longer. We have today 270 students, or project 270 students. It may be higher than that. That last number is simply a projection. This is a special education population by school. I'm sorry, sometimes when we bring a graph on a stick, it shows a little bit differently, so I don't know what's going on with that. That graph, but you can see that the total for the 15-16 years, 237. Most of the largest number is at the elementary school. That's to be expected because that's the largest school in enrollment. And our percentage of students with special needs is about on par with the state average.
Michael?
Yes.
I do notice, though, that from 2011 to 2017, your percentage of special ed seems to have dropped a little bit.
The percentage seems to have dropped because the enrollment has increased.
Yes.
So the hard numbers are increasing slightly, but the percentage might seem to go down a little bit. And we'll see that same phenomenon when we look at the per pupil expenditure.
Okay. There's no significance to that.
I don't think so. I think people tend to get in love with the numbers, particularly with class size, for example. And I always say it really is about the makeup more than it is about the numbers. As a teacher, I've had a class of 25 that was easier than a class of 20 because of the children that made up that group. But I don't think I would point out a trend, John, based on that. And so that's our 16 budget figure. Our 17 budget figure is a projected increase of $1 million. And we've shown a graph of the operating budget over the years. Steady rise, certainly since the 2010-11 school year, and that's when our population started to increase. And from 2008 to 2010, we had a slight decrease, and I'm sure you'll know that corresponds with the economy at that time. Moving forward, this is an interesting slide, I think, per pupil expenditure using the state's way formula for figuring this out. You will see that our per pupil expenditure since 2008 and 9 has gone down from a high of $22,810, and then each year, and it's slight, but it is going down, while at the same time the state per pupil expenditure has been going up slightly. This is the slide that I'm saying really reflects an increase in the overall numbers of the students that we have coming into the school divided by the overall budget. Joe?
I'm just curious, Michael, what the difference between the mainland and Nantucket, obviously we all know Nantucket is expensive. Is it basically, personnel costs, or is it just sort of everything costs?
Great question, and we certainly look at this. We see, okay, how are we compared to the W's, Wayland, Weston, Winchester? How are we compared to the Cape? And then we tend to look at the Vineyard because it's really our sort of only comp. There are clearly expenditures that are higher because we're 30 miles out to sea. The areas that probably are the greatest would be vocational education, because our students can't go to an area vocational program. If you're on the mainland, you might go to this school or in town for auto shop and another town for wood shop. There are area vocational programs. So we have to provide a breadth of vocational programs so that our students can participate. The other area is athletics. Obviously, every time we send kids off, it's a ferry ride and a boat. And a bus ride at the other end. Officials, we're paying for their travel. So athletics becomes another one of those drivers. And I would say the other one, Joe, is probably special education, because again, on the mainland, you can have your students participate in an area special ed program, a day program. And so they have collaboratives that get together, and we can't do that. We need to provide our programs here as much as we can, and we've been building those programs to minimize sending students to residential programs. So those, I'd say, are the three, but you could say food is higher when we're looking at the food programs. I think you could probably look at it in many areas. And the cost of living and salaries to keep up with the cost of living.
Thank you.
Yes.
Upper decile for per pupil expenditure in the state, is that?
Yeah, we were in those years when we hit 22,008 and 9, we were probably in the top 5 at that point. We have gone down, but decile, probably, 5. Yeah. Thank you, Martin.
John?
Yes.
Do you have anything more up to date than the 2013-14, or do you? Is that the way it?
Yeah, that's the way the state works, and these are their figures. We won't have the 14-15. Now, we do our own per pupil expenditure, but we don't use the same formula, so I wouldn't carry it out because I think you need to keep the same formula in comparing.
But you have probably a rough idea of, is it going up or is it staying about the same? Or?
I would say it's probably pretty consistent. Okay. The next slide is the Chapter 70 historical comparison, and you'll see that that's always been a pretty steady number coming to Nantucket with a huge jump from 13-14 to 14-15 and another jump in 15-16. Significant. The 16-17, I want to make clear, is a projection, and that is not something that I would expect Brian Turbot has plugged in yet because it's not a solid number from the state as of yet. This is a very complicated formula. It'd probably take Martin and Glenn Field and Brian a couple of hours to explain Chapter 70, or what we often refer to as foundation aid. The next slide shows our federal grants. This number is pretty close, slightly higher than it was last year. These are what I refer to as entitlement grants. We know that we're going to get Title I money. We're entitled to Title II money and Title III money. Title I is typically used for remedial reading or remedial math in a school district. And we hire one reading teacher and do a few other things out of that grant. Title II is professional development. That's actually gone down slightly over the last few years. Title III is our ELL grant that we receive based on the number of English language learners that we serve. That is the one grant that has gone up the highest. And that would make sense looking at our enrollment increases with that population. And then IDEA is our major special education grant. And that hires a number of related staff and services for special education, and then some smaller preschool grants.
Peter. Michael, if I could, just a question about Title III. Running some numbers of our students in comparison to one of the other municipalities in the Commonwealth, we have 270 students, as you've noted, which represents about 17% of our total, give or take.
234. 270 was projected, but
Yep.
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So 17% of our students received, of course, the Title III that we received from the Fed via the state was $38,000 and change. Malden, which is a larger city, which has like almost 16,000 students, their ELL students represented about 7%, although their recipients or monies received from the Commonwealth were on average $185 per ELL student. Ours came out to about $142. So even though our percentage was higher,
The dollar.
our dollar was lower.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd look at, there are other codes under Title III, 186, for example, that maybe we could get some monies. I'm not sure if we filled out those applications, but there are, it seems almost concerning that we have much more as a percentage of ELLs, and yet our monies from the state are lower than other communities.
And I'll take that as an observation, and Jeremiah might be able to speak to it. He is the director of our ELL program.
Yes, sir. Many of those cities are.
You want to come to the microphone?
Pardon me, sir.
Great, thank you.
Malden, I believe, is a gateway community, and the 186 has a supplemental grant for
Correct.
ports of entry for immigrant students. So we receive their allotment every year as a notice. They tell us what we're going to make. We're not privy to any of their calculations at all.
But your question raises a good point, and something we did push back about a year about Gateway. Well, how do you become a gateway city? Because we may not be a city, but we have become a gateway in many respects. So, to your point.
And what was the answer?
I think that it has to do with the size of the overall community. So we're not a city; we're a town. So I think there's a threshold that they look at for gateway cities. There are no small towns in those gateway communities. Springfield, Lowell.
Yeah, they were all cities, they were.
Yeah.
And if I could, just to go back to one of the other slides, when you look at our expenditures per student, and I'll call them flat over the last 5 years, we know that our population has grown, where the state's per capita per student has gone up. Once again, ours was flat. In looking at some of the recent, I think Dr. Bucky just sent out an email relevant to proficiency of students, and we hit a pinnacle in 2012 on efficiency, and our per capita spending per student since then has stayed flat, but yet our efficiencies over the last 3 years with English, math, and science have gone down. Are we not investing enough? I mean, it's...
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and I think that we are trying very hard to balance providing for all children, and there are protected, disaggregated groups that have certain protections, such as special education and ELL, and we've had quite a few conversations about making sure that we have programs for all of our students. Our biggest opportunities in our budget have been, quite honestly, in the retirement of veteran staff and replacing with staff who are not as expensive, and then broadening a program such as vocational education. I mean, we added, because we had opportunities to take that savings and apply it here or apply it there. Those are the biggest. I think the other thing that we've tried to do is be mindful that we are moving forward with a building project, and so we've tried not to push the limits on the budget because of that piece. And we know that next year, as we develop the FY18 budget, we will probably see a jump. We know that there are going to be plant operations. As we bring another building, 72,000 square feet, we're going to be hiring 6 or 7 custodians. So it's a matter of developing priorities. But I would say in this budget, we have been able to expand and add staffing and some programs. But we have to meet the needs of a very diverse population, and I don't speak just in terms of ethnicity.
If I could just pick up on the comment about the cost differential in salaries between tenured long-term employees, and then as they retire, you convert them. I know most folks who've been employed here for 20 to 25 years were able to purchase a home when they first started, and as they retired, they're oftentimes replaced with folks where housing is a real challenge. I'm just talking community-wide. Yep. What's been the experience of the school district in terms of new hires and their housing needs? It's
hard. It's very hard for our new faculty.
You keep track of
and we do. We try. We have several people, Caitlin Waddington at the community school and Logan O'Connor in my office, who keep their finger on the pulse of housing and help find things for people. I think that housing, we can't. Some people have suggested that we pay a housing stipend for new staff, for example. quite frankly, while that's something that we might want to look at, that alone is not going to allow somebody to come here and buy a house.
No, I understand. Right,
And
yeah. I think
so-
the future of that, right, we're just talking about affordable, even rental
Right.
housing.
No, and I think
And I'm
what-
not suggesting the stipend, I'm just asking what your data's, and I'm interested in knowing if it's been a factor on turnover and people leaving because they couldn't find affordable housing. What's been the experience?
I can give you, probably qualitative data on some people that we have lost.
That's what I'm asking, just
Yeah.
in general.
3 years ago, we lost a great young family with both educators because they couldn't find year-round, and they didn't want to do the shuffle anymore. Do I have situations like that? Certainly. I think, though, to be fair, we probably lose more people, not because of the housing, but because Nantucket might not be a fit. And I don't want to minimize that housing is a problem, but I think the greater thing is, how do I react to being 30 miles out to sea and not being able to get to the bright lights of Boston or wherever.
Okay. Thank you.
This is just a breakout of expenses versus payroll, and then a breakout of the budget by school and by department. You can see that the elementary school has the largest budget by percentage, and you would expect that because they have over 700 students. The high school would be the second largest because you have some programs in a high school that you might not find at the other levels, particularly the vocational programs. And then central office, technology, athletics, and facilities round that out. This is an interesting slide, the community school appropriation. I don't have consecutive years, but I wanted to show the appropriation at what I think was its low ebb, 97, 98, and 2009 and 10. Both years it was near 235,000. And then the high in 2001, 2002 of 402,000. I show the graph this way because I want people to understand what the overall budget is, and based on our appropriation to the community school determines how much of our budget needs to be made up by participant fees, donations, and grants. And we want to watch that closely, because if that is skewed, we could be in a situation where we're pricing the community school programs beyond what the people who may need the most can afford. So it's just an interesting, I think, way to look at the appropriation. We're appreciative that it has increased by 50,000 for this coming year, and I think the FinCom and certainly the Board of Selectmen know that the community school has worked closely with the town of Nantucket to help them with some of their programs, including recreation. It's another slide that I created when I came here, because the first few years I discovered that we had to make up the difference between what we were budgeting for special ed tuition and what we got back from the state in circuit breaker. And so that green in those 3 years of 9, 10, 10, 11, 11, 12 showed what we had to come up with at the end of the year to make special education whole. And Nancy and I determined that we were going to, and with Glenn's help, increase the appropriation in 2011-12 so that we could minimize looking for that money at the end of the year, which was basically robbing from Peter to pay Paul. And I'm happy to say that in the last 5 years, we haven't needed to sort out that budget differential. We've had enough between what we appropriated and what we got back in circuit breaker from the state. 16-17 is a projection, and actually I'm not sure that 15-16 are real numbers yet, but we're pretty close to having accurate numbers. Martin says that it is. So, but the 16-17 is projected. And then these are just the parameters that the administrative team had from the budget directives of the school committee, supporting students who are English language learners. We've certainly added staff and added an administrator to be in charge of that. But we also wanted to maintain or decrease class sizes for all students, and we've been able to do that. Developing programs, as I mentioned, for students with special needs so that we are not sending them off island. Residential special ed tuitions off island range from $50,000 to $200,000 a year. So you can see why just on a fiscal sense that we want to minimize that, but we also want to minimize it because parents want their children here and don't want them to have to go off island unless we absolutely can't provide for them. And then developing curriculum and assessment. And that really, I think, if we go on to one more. Here are some of the things that we accomplished with this budget, and again, they relate to the slide before, but we have provided more support for ELL students. We will be adding a teacher at the elementary school, third grade, because we have 6 classes of second grade and 5 third grade teachers, so we'll be adding a teacher there. We're adding a social studies teacher at Nantucket High School. And unified arts, art and music is increasing at the middle school, and the last thing on the list is that we're adding a staff member for the grounds crew, which really just brings it back to the staffing that we had 5 years ago. And this slide shows costs for all of the increases that we're looking at in the budget. I would draw your attention to the new special ed director. This always makes Nancy a little uncomfortable, and I don't mean to, but she will be retiring next year. And as she does, the school committee and I have come to the conclusion that we need her on while the new person comes in, so that that job in particular on the island is very unique. So this would allow us to bring somebody on board and work with Nancy for a period of time before she retires. And then the district-wide interpreter translator, we have a person, but we need that person in the summer. The students and parents don't stop coming in the summer months, and so that is sorely needed. And that really covers the budget. You have much more detail in your packets for each of the schools, central office, athletics, all of the departments. And if you have any questions, Martin and I will try to field them or pass them on.
And Michael, why don't you, while you're up, do you want to do
The capital?
and
Okay.
at the same time, and maybe give us a quick update on the school building project and
Okay.
where you are?
Happy to do that. These are the projects that we have moved forward with for the capital expenditures. And I'll just take you through some pictures and discussions of each of the items. And again, Diane can jump up if I neglect something. But the first is a capital request of $250,000 for the high school building improvements. A large part of that will be the high school library that needs renovation, painting, new carpeting, some new furniture in there. The front apron of the building, if you've been in recently, is the concrete has really degraded, and we need to improve that significantly. We have a few more locker room and plumbing, and the field house. You may have, if you've driven First Way and you've seen the back of the field house, you'll see shingling up about halfway, and that's thanks to Mike Gervin and the building trades, because they've done that shingling, but we can't have them up on scaffolding to complete it. So, and then the next one is to continue our window replacement. We've done this for 2 years now, various banks of windows, and that is should have a difference, make a difference in our heating costs. Next one is a new truck for the grounds crew. The existing one is a 2000 Ford F-250, and so we're looking at adding one with a plow and a Tommy gate. Obviously, as we've added a new parking lot and we'll have a new school, there are going to be more grounds to take care of. The next one is HVAC at the elementary school, and as we build our new intermediate school, we don't want to forget about the needs in the existing elementary school, and we need a completely new software system for the HVAC. I think over time, and certainly that building has had a significant addition, a lot of the classrooms are very inconsistent in heating and HVAC, and this will allow us to run those more efficiently. We have some exterior repairs, so $250,000, some trim work, and I think you can see that as you go around the building. We try to keep up with it, but I think it's a constant. And then finally, and this actually changed from our first presentation to Capcom. We had in there finishing the seating in the auditorium, but it was brought to our attention that we have some rather serious problems with the lifts in the auto shop, and that rose to a greater need. And so we feel that we definitely need to do that this summer.
Great. You want to give a quick update on the construction project, just for our interest and edification?
Be happy to. We have a date, actually, that we'll be sending out to our community for the official groundbreaking, which will be Wednesday, February 17th at 1 o'clock. Very excited, but I think anybody that's driven by the site knows that we're not waiting for that groundbreaking ceremony to break ground. The parking lot the tar is up, and they are moving fast. Our GC, general contractor, Brait Builders, has been wonderful. They have come in here and hit the ground running, and they're on a very aggressive schedule. While we were hoping that we could open this new intermediate school in September of 17, they're aiming for April. And I sort of smile and say, okay, good for you. We'll see. But even if they can finish in July or August, that would be terrific, because it's a project, as you know, that could easily hit a snag at any point, and we'll knock on wood and hope that doesn't happen. But they've been very good to work with, not just the speed with which they're working, but the safety. And I think that Kim Kubish, principal of the elementary school, has commented several times about how efficient they are monitoring their trucks and their men and workers. And so we're very excited, moving quickly. Over February vacation, the demolition of the middle school wood shop will take place. We wanted to demolish that when kids weren't in session. So you'll see some activity there just as we approach February vacation, and then they'll start building. They expect to be done sometime this summer, and so that part of the renovation will be completed for September of 16. So aggressive schedule, and we're very excited about the design and the work that's being done.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate you. As you know, we all have the detailed financials. We've had about a week to review that. Thank you so much for getting that out so far ahead. So we'll take just general questions and just go ahead and ask them. Go ahead.
Just a quick high-level question, Michael. The $1 million increase in the budget, there was a summary spreadsheet. I just want to make sure I'm reading it correctly, that $636,000 is sort of costs that are built into labor contracts, things that are really kind of
You're right.
out of management control, if you will.
Yep.
And the other, not quite 400,000, are all the various positions and initiatives that you summarized in your presentation.
That's correct, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any question?
Yeah, just go ahead.
I know I asked this last year with the build-up to the new school. Is it routine to apply for the loans, I guess, or grants from the Massachusetts School Building Authority? Is that something that's...
We tried that several years, and we couldn't even get them to do the site visit and put us higher up in the queue. It was very frustrating for us not to be considered when there were other districts that made us scratch our head, probably like you. I won't name any of them, but and I think that the difference is, as they go around and look at schools, they were looking at very old, dilapidated buildings. I think that was higher in their priorities than the numbers that we're seeing, because when they came out, I believe it was maybe 10 years ago, and I'm not sure who here can remember that, but they came out about 10 years ago and pretty much scoffed at our needs at that time. Now, our enrollment wasn't then what it is today, but our buildings were in good shape. So that isn't something that you can do after the fact, Craig.
Sure. Well, and I guess, and you made the point that there are other communities in Massachusetts that are higher median income that are getting these grants. So there's something in the mix that I know Nantucket has the cachet that we don't need the money, but
I think it's really the condition of the buildings. It would be my guess. I mean, I never went to Concord and looked at their buildings or any of the other communities that were awarded, but my guess would be that the condition of their buildings were such that.
Well, I mean, you just showed us slides of leaky windows
Yeah.
and other things that need. I don't know. I guess it would be nice that we're considered like any other community in need, even though it might not appear so. But
I wouldn't argue with that at all.
so, is it a matter of, I don't know, continuing to apply and putting more pressure on somebody?
Well, again, you cannot apply after the fact now and get monies for
No, I
the
understand
buildings.
that.
But I think any future buildings we absolutely should and would.
I mean, here you have a 5-year plan with 1.1 million. Is that something that we could make part of the application to them and say we do have need, we have a financial need?
For the capital,
Yeah.
I think that they do it based on a building, not based on the.
I guess I was referring more for repair of the buildings.
Right.
It sounds like something they apply money to.
I don't know that the building does individual repairs. I don't know if Diane can speak to that.
There are some applications for individual repairs, more roofs than anything else. So unless we had a real roof issue that we wanted to replace a roof, I don't see anything else in there that, when I look at the other applications, the other cities and towns, that are job specific. Try. Don't.
David? Thanks.
Michael, on the the overall budget, you've got pie charts and breakdowns for the different groups. When I went and looked at all the individuals, the numbers don't seem to tie together. And are we just dealing with timing issues of when these were all put together? So, for example, if you look at the high school number, it's different than it shows on other pie charts, and I assume those are driven by something.
I'm going to have to look to Martin.
Martin.
The pie charts that are part of the individual budgets are this particular school year, not the fiscal 17. So that's the difference.
Okay, so all the pie chart, even though they say they're...
Well, they say school year 2015-2016,
Okay.
Which is the current
that
year.
would explain why the individual budgets don't tie to the overall.
No, but these, you mean why did they don't tie for this year?
Well, if you've got, the 2017 budget is whatever.
We're discussing
in
now.
high school, for example, it's 5.456. If you go to another budget, and now you've explained why it is. For 15-16, it's...
I think you answered the question. It's actual versus budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're all set.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah,
John, yeah.
This is more of a looking to the future. In my mind, we had I think this budget was a 3-point something increase over, it comes out in percentages, 3.8 I think it is, increase. And you had alluded to it a little bit before about the fact that we have a new school. And so 2018 is going to be just about right if everything goes along. So it looks like you're kind of, I don't know whether you're warming us up or you're anticipating a fairly...
I was warming you up.
Yeah.
Guilty.
Yeah.
No, I've talked to Libby about that as well, and Brian, and we are trying to do some of the increases this coming year and to ameliorate the expenses that are going to come on board. For example, we're going to want a nurse for the new building, the intermediate school. So we've had a nurse retire that will be retiring this year, Meg Roberts, who's just been amazing. But as we hire a new nurse, we're looking at the ability, and we may be losing Bonnie in another year or two, so we're looking at the ability to get 3 for 2. Things like that will mean that we won't be looking for that increase in the FY18 through hiring. We'll be looking at hiring a custodian, this coming year and that may help us decrease the numbers that we're going to have to bring. So we're keeping an eye on that. Most of the staff, it's a pretty simple, the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade teachers in the elementary school are going to be the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade teachers in the intermediate school. So that's a little bit easier. But some of the other staff we will try to share between the buildings, such as a speech therapist or an occupational therapist or different programs like that. So we're trying to keep an eye on that and keep it down, but we know that just the custodians alone is going to be a big ticket for us.
Anything else? Peter.
Michael, it's incredible to look at the athletics, that the correlation between those who play in sports have a high GPA. And we have 512 students in the high school. 329 are actually in sports, which is about 65%. Is the reason that's at 65%, is it because there are students who don't care to get into sports? Is it a budgetary cap that keeps that at 65%? Or is it just they don't want to play, the other kids?
I think I look at that maybe a little bit differently. I think 65% is an incredibly high
Number.
number. And it always heartens me to look at the number of kids who are participating in our programs, and to acknowledge what they do to be both students and athletes. You know, my hat is off to them. We had a student write a piece about that I shared with a school committee, and she was talking about, you know, the ferry rides and doing your homework and the groups of kids, you know, doing things and getting back at, you know, sometimes even 10 at night. So I think our athletes, our student athletes, are amazing. I think somebody once questioned if we were inflating grades for our student athletes. And I said, you know, the discipline that it takes to play a sport, and what you learn in the sport is applied in the classroom. And so I think it makes sense that our student athletes, you know, would have high GPAs because they know how to manage their time. They have to. And they also have to maintain the grades to be able to play. So I think the number overall, I'm very happy. No student is ever kept out of participation because of a cost of an impact fee. There are scholarships. Our athletic boosters are a great support. And so we've never had any student who didn't participate because of finances.
What percentage of the expenses are borne by the parents that we don't see in a budget for?
Yeah, there are
Sports.
impacts fees on a sliding scale, and it can't be more than a certain amount for a family. So I think it's pretty small. Off the top of my head, is it $75? $125 a sport. But it goes down depending on the number of sports that a student plays or the number of people in a family.
I think I get that benefit.
Yeah.
Maybe a contractual question about the transportation back and forth. Is that done by someone on the school committee or you or the town when they contract the rate per student per passage?
Yes, and I would say that the steamship and Highline have been very good to the student athletes of Nantucket Public School. We get a great rate, and we couldn't manage it without them.
Good. Thank you.
So I do this every year, but I just to your point, Peter, because of the kind of volunteer work I do to interview kids that went to my alma mater, and a couple have gotten in the last couple of years from here. Both were student athletes. Both were phenomenally smart and high achievement kids. One went on as a walk-on to play soccer for this university, and one just finished, who was a student athlete here, just finished this past semester with straight A's. And as someone who got a lot less than that when I went there, it was a huge, so that's just some anecdotal information.
Yeah.
I just had two kind of open-ended questions, and I want you to step back from thinking budget. Okay, these are leadership questions. Two things. I want two questions. What is the one thing that keeps you awake at night? And then number two, when you dream about your vision for this school district, what's the one thing you dream about?
Okay, is this televised?
Yes.
I knew.
And I didn't mean. I mean,
No, I knew. I'm just.
Those are important.
I'm having fun.
As the leader.
You know, I think that. Boy, those are two great questions. Vision. And we just had this talk. I want to make sure that we are serving all of our students, including our best and brightest, as well as we are the groups that we are required and mandated to serve, if that makes sense.
Good,
And
absolutely, yeah.
and I think that sometimes, we work rightfully hard to help disenfranchised students, but I want to make sure that we're doing the work in the middle and at the other end too. So that's probably what keeps me. It's both. That's vision and what keeps me awake. Sometimes it's the people. What keeps me awake are people who look at the glass half empty, and that's discouraging. And I want to say, look what's happening.
Right.
Look at all the good things that are happening, not just in the schools, but in the community. And I'm very grateful, and I think we all should be. And I think that we all need to take the minor inconveniences in our growth with a grain of salt, and not freak out over the small stuff when so many good things are happening.
Great. Great advice. Thank you, and thanks to all of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, just to refresh everybody's memory, I believe John really started this initiative some month or two ago, as we've been looking at capital planning from the capital program, the capital committee, and we were looking at long-term capital expenditures. We as a committee asked Brian to develop a model for the payment of those, debt modeling for payment of those major projects, and he and his consultant have spent a fair amount of time with it, and he's going to present and walk us through the model. So today's conversation is really more of an orientation. We'll have further conversations about this over time, and it's something I had to be reminded when Brian went over this with. This is a model, so we can debate what an item might cost, but that number can always be changed in the model. So I encourage us to take a look at the model, have an understanding of it, and also really understand, as I did, that Brian brings a level of significant expertise to this. He's brought some very innovative thinking to this, which he's going to share with us, and I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there is one other piece that I just want to share with you before we get into this. The tax rate impacts, it's about 7 or 8 pages, came at about 3:45 this afternoon, so I haven't even had a chance to look at it. So as soon as I go through it, I will certainly send that out, and as we continue this discussion, it'll be another component to this. So as the chairman said, this is 31 pages long. Essentially what it did was, it starts with everything that we have currently that we have approved for debt on the books now, and it runs that out. And then the next 9 pages, I believe it is, add everything in based on when we project the year when the debt would actually hit, when we would actually be putting it into the tax base. And the 9th page, because there's so much of it, gets down into the last page 9 of that shows when what the debt service modeling would look like in the general fund on a yearly basis to when all of the current debt is expired. Now, at the top of every page, on the first 9 pages, it shows you exactly what we have modeled for the interest rates for the borrowing, so that everybody can see what Cinder and her staff from First Southwest and I have kind of built into this based on what they think might happen, and some protection against this in the model. The pages 10 through 31, page 10 is all of the current debt extrapolated out, bottom showing everything that it makes up all of that, of our debt that's currently on the books still. And then page 11 is just the short-term borrowing that we have out. The only short-term borrowing we have out right now is for the school. And then the other remaining pages, going from page 12 through 31, essentially show everything that we assume to have borrowed out of the capital plan that the capital program committee had presented to you, and as well as the addition of, in this model, there's only the addition of the Monomoy or Nantucket Harbor Shimo, and the plus parcels. It does not include the Mattocket and Warren's Landing or the Somerset. We're building a second model to build those in, but when the selectmen took those out, we did not include them in this original model. So I'm actually building a second model just to have that. There will be a kind of a third modeling to show the other 4 projects that don't exist here for sewer, being Hummock Pond North and South, Maya Comet, and Nantucket Harbor. Is it Shakamo? Is that right? Is the other? No, Shimo's in here. Shakamo. Yeah. So what's all known as Nantucket Harbor Shakamo. One of the things that we did, I wanted to talk about a little bit because it's a unique application that we may try to leverage in the future on some of these larger projects. If on page 12, you'll notice it says fiscal year 16. It actually probably will turn out to be fiscal year 17, but it's still, the principle will be the same. You'll notice that it says school and fire station on there for borrowings. And we rounded for these, so and the school actually will be a little under 50 million, but for this we kind of rounded it to get to an easier benchmark. What we're doing is we're looking at borrowing 75% of the total cost of the projects immediately and permanently borrowing it so that it would sit on the tax rates. If we do it in 17, it would actually hit into 18. And by doing that, if you look, I'll just use the school because the metrics and the method or the methodology is the same for the fire station. If we permanently borrow $37,500,000, we can generate $5 million of bond premium net of issuance costs that can be used to buy down the actual amount that we borrow on the school, thus reducing interest costs. So by doing this, if we needed to borrow all of the authorization, we would end up only borrowing $45 million. We would save $5 million in borrowing in long-term interest costs by doing this. It's something that we're looking at. Cinder actually proposed it to us just because of the size of the premiums that we can generate. And it would be something that we could potentially look at doing in the future. There's 2 options when you generate a premium, when you have debt excluded debt. You can apply it to the project cost, thus reducing the amount that you actually borrow, or you can ratably amortize it over the life of the bond and then take it against what you're raising in the tax rate every year. But generating this much of a premium, if we did it this way, the better solution would be to not have to borrow as much money and apply it directly to the project cost. So it may happen in 17. We had originally anticipated it was going to happen in 16, but I don't believe we're going to make the timing at this point to actually do it in 16, so this would slightly change. But it's something we are looking at to try to bring down the actual amount that we're borrowing.
So I'll just interject because we may want to chat about this, but this is when I reference the innovative ideas that Brian and his Cinder have. This is it. It's when we talked about it, this has not been something in the past. I think the town has paid for its issuance cost. I'm not sure what the
we always sell the bonds at a premium to pay for our issuance costs because they get rather expensive when we're issuing debt or going to the market. But we have not ever conceived a concept to do this. It's been First Southwest has modeled this and done it other communities, which is why they recommended it. Another reason is because that it would work for us, I guess, is also because our debt is desirable out in the market, so it's something that we can generate a little bit larger premium.
Yep. So, all right.
So essentially,
Brian?
Yes.
And the premium gets generated because at 3.5%, that's a premium rate in the marketplace, and so you get $1,050 per bond instead of $1,000?
Yes. Yeah.
So you get proceeds of $1,050.
We get
50
right.
being
you
didn't anticipate in
right.
the model.
Right.
So that's okay.
So we would use that. Typically, the way we do it is we use it to pay the issuance cost, and then whatever's left over. And we do have some that we're amortizing over a period of time because it had been generated. We amortize it yearly against the amount of the debt exclusion. Under this scenario and under the law generating a premium of this amount, we would actually just apply it so that we would reduce the actual borrowing cost for the total project. Because the other option would be to take 1/20 of $5 million every single year and then we would end up borrowing all of the total cost. So we're trying to reduce the actual amount that we're borrowing.
I mean, I don't understand municipal finance, so why wouldn't you pay a lower rate and just have a very modest premium that covers your borrowing costs? Instead of, in effect, you're borrowing, you're paying a higher rate than you need to.
We're still paying a very low rate anyway, so comparatively speaking, when we borrow the money. So it's not.
All right,
I'll model
take
it.
it offline.
We'll model it both ways, but I think in the end, even paying that small premium to get that larger premium, it still is more beneficial to us over the long term.
Okay, thank you. John, anybody else have a question on this scenario? All right. Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I mean, the rest of it, the last pages are just all of the capital projects built out, and it shows all of the debt and how it would be. I mean, the one thing that I would point out as we look through this that we kind of have to work on is that we do reach a high point in 2022 of $13.9 million, and then go down from there in debt service. It's on page, it would be page 9. So if everything that we have modeled into this actually came to fruition in the time that we think it is, the high point that we reach is $13.9 million in debt service for fiscal year 2022. So I'm looking at ways to kind of smooth it out to maybe bring that number down, which is one of the things that we're working on now by either changing the way the principal is amortized or maybe pushing a borrowing out if it would make sense. I mean, we do run interest rate risk by pushing it out a little bit, but it may be something that can bring that number down to smooth some of those areas out, because we get a small run up and then obviously we start back down.
In that 13.9, is that all general fund borrowing?
This is all general funded.
No enterprise.
It excludes enterprise funds. Right. So this is solely general fund. And all debt this is all debt exclusion. Anything that's financed within the levy limits this is only debt exclusion debt. But we have very small amount is financed through the levy limit. So
John, this was something that you'd asked for. Does this meet your expectations?
Yeah. Is there and maybe I just haven't looked, but do you have the 10-year capital plan that's behind a lot of this?
Well, that was with the capital program committee had sent that. I'll resend it to everybody. What's in here is only what we expect to have to ultimately borrow out of that capital plan. We had projected about $3 million annually of other available funds.
Yeah, you had a little thing in there.
Right.
Yeah, what I was looking for is if you had the details behind it in a capital plan.
Well, in this, we have the details of the capital projects we would, and I'll resend you the 10-year capital plan. But in here, it does delineate on an annualized basis what we would be borrowing.
I appreciate that.
And that was, like I said, we pulled out some large-scale projects and anticipated borrowing for them.
Yeah, I understand that. I always like to see the detail behind it.
I will resend you that 10-year capital plan that they had presented to you. Absolutely.
Great.
So there are wastewater treatment plant bonds included in this number?
Yes. Well, the MWPAT would be the SRF funding for the project that we're putting forward. MWPAT is the entity that manages the SRF, so that's why that shows in there like that.
So it is an enterprise fund.
Well, this is the general fund, the 40% of the project that we had proposed.
And the other components, and the other part ends up being in the enterprise.
It would be in the enterprise fund, and it would be funded by betterments. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
John?
Jim, I'll be very interested to see the tax.
Yeah, and like I said, I just need to go through and make sure that it looks like I thought it was going to, and I will send that probably by tomorrow. I can send that out to you, but I got it at 3:45 today. So
That'll be
So
interesting.
we
Yes.
can put this on the agenda for another meeting to go over that?
sure.
All right.
Sure.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The next item on the agenda is discussion of sewer projects. And I'm going to recuse myself from this conversation and turn it over to our Vice Chair, Mr. Williams.
I'm not sure the format of what we're going to do with the sewer, other than just discuss it amongst ourselves, or are we going to use any models or?
No, I probably will give you an update a little bit, and then we can have anybody else that did you want me to do that? Okay. So the other day we had a meeting amongst the, I guess what you would say is the public outreach group, and during that meeting, I think everybody may have seen the email. We, in discussion with council, have determined that land value is not advisable at all, and that under the statute there really is two options: a uniform unit method for calculating the betterment, which takes the number of connections and then the connections that you estimate could be created based on zoning, and applies that against the project cost. So in this case, it would be against the 60% that the selectmen voted, and that would give you a uniform cost, which then the sewer commissioners can come up with a policy on how to allocate that. I think some people have seen the Falmouth model that they use the unit method, and then they charge you depending on how many bedrooms are in the house above a certain number for a single-family residence. The second method is kind of along the same vein as land value. It's called the gross area method, but it is very rarely used. The majority, according to not only our council, but according to our consultants, is the primary method is really the uniform allocation method. So I'm working on reconfiguring the modeling to get rid of the land value calculation so it doesn't display anymore. And then the director of planning is reviewing the areas that we're doing to look at, based on the zoning, to make sure that the estimated number of connections is in line, or whether it needs to be increased, or whether it's correct. So we're moving forward with that. We have a sewer workshop coming up, which I'll be giving another presentation with the recommendation on how to move forward to calculate these betterments with something that is more in line with what really is actually everybody has seen being done. So,
Which will presumably be more like Falmouth.
Presumably something closer to that. I'm still I have their model and I'm looking at it and to try to see what makes most sense in that recommendation.
Brian, I was under the impression that town council had said that the property value methodology was acceptable, and that's why the work group spent as much time on that, going back to last spring. That is correct. We had a discussion. I think that it was kind of born out of the extremely large numbers. I did rerun it using gross area for each property, and it creates the same exact large or even larger betterments based on that. I think that it's not something that is really seen to be done everywhere, even though instead of land value, it would have actually been under the gross land value, or gross area value, I'm sorry. It creates extremely large betterments like we had seen, and again, both our consultant and council said it's not something that they really ever seen done, if at all, has ever been done. Well, I'm a little bit, when I saw the email that came through, I was a little distressed that an awful lot of brain power went into this that goes back, and I distinctly remember that the chair of the work group conveyed that this was an acceptable method and that town council had vetted it. And as you know, an awful lot of brain power has gone into trying to work on this over the past 6 or 8 months.
There's been awful lot of manpower on my time to go into
Yeah.
it. Sure, I understand. That's not lost on me on this. But it's, their recommendation is to not, at this point, is to not use it. So I'm kind of moving in that direction to come up with a recommendation that is doable and workable.
Understood. I guess I want to be on record in the minutes that I'm very disappointed in town council's advice, because it has taken a lot of your time and a lot of other people's time, and here we are looking at something that is very different. Had we started off in 6 or 8 or 10 months ago in this fashion, then we perhaps would be in a very different place. Maybe not number-wise,
right?
But there's been an awful lot of effort that's been put in, and I'm really disappointed with the advice that came from town council on this.
John, did you have a question?
No.
Go ahead.
Brian, do you have any, what you're saying is either way, there's going to be some very large
Yes.
betterment.
So going back and using gross area just to see what it did, it produces essentially the same or larger numbers than using land value, which was determined to not be appropriate. So
Is there any other alternative?
that is two under the statute in under 8315, the uniform allocation method, or essentially the gross area method.
So we're locked in?
Yeah.
Well, so Brian, does the
luck.
uniform, pardon me, John, does the uniform unit method, does that smooth these numbers we're talking about? Does it?
Well, what it does is it creates what's known as the essentially a sewer unit, which is the equivalent of a single-family house, and then you have at your discretion from within that to how to allocate the units to properties. Okay, so some examples are, I think in Falmouth, they created the single-family home equivalent was 4 bedrooms. Above that, in multifamilies, gets 1.5 units of whatever that is. Commercial property, you take the flow, divide it by 440 gallons, which is 110 gallons per day per bedroom in the single-family home, so the 440, and you create the equivalent number of bedrooms, and then assign the equivalent units. So that's kind of where you smooth it out, so that which essentially would reach somewhat of the same distribution that the sewer work group was looking at in a different way. So,
But it sounds like it compresses the.
It absolutely
the per,
would. It
per
would, right?
Lot cost.
It will compress that part. Yes, that's correct.
However,
it's right.
So it'll bring the highest ones down, but it'll bring the lowest ones up.
Yes.
Yep. So I have a question for David. When the work group met, did you decide on the uniform unit or not use that method, or it wasn't on the table?
Well, I mean, during that we had presented what the number would look like, because it's been in every sheet that we had presented. We've used it as a comparison kind of in through all of these presentations. It just was not the direction that they went or that was chosen to come out of there. But it had been presented in all of them. It was in all the impacts schedules that I had ever created. So it was looked at but not utilized, except as a comparator, I guess, to the average land value that was put out.
That's correct. I think the more nuanced answer to that question, however, is that in the uniform unit method and then making adjustments up and down was never...
That was not discussed.
No
That's
time
correct.
was spent on
Right.
that because, the uniform unit method was always sort of, and if you did it this way, this is what it would look like. So in that regard, Brian's absolutely spot on. We did provide that information, and the work group was able to, take a look at it. It was not the direction, obviously, that we ended up spending our time.
So as much time as we've spent and as far as we've come, we're still now back to the drawing board in a sense, or we're waiting from town council and the board of selectmen to...
No, I mean, I'll be at the workshop be giving the board the same update, which they've been notified about that change and a recommendation. So I don't know that we're back to square one. We just have to make a little bit of a directional change.
Okay.
I think in the end, ultimately, if the uniform method is the direction, it will certainly make things a little easier for people to understand what the betterments are going to be, and I think it'll make the discussions easier. But that's where we'll be at the workshop, at least when I make the presentation on Wednesday.
I mean, I think we've tended to focus on the cost of the betterment and its allocation. I think there's another issue here, which is the affordability of individuals to be able to actually not only pay the betterment, which presumably is going to be amortized over 30 years on one's tax bill, but then the actual raw costs of the connection, the privilege fee, getting the pipe to the house, and taking the septic system out of service. And that is a fairly substantial fee. And while this situation isn't totally analogous, the place that I lived in Boston which were all condos, and a major capital call on people to replace windows in the HVAC system. So major that it forced people to sell their homes because it was substantial. It's on the order of the kinds of numbers that we're talking about here. Now, there clearly are plenty of people that aren't going to suffer that, but I just find that we've totally not had a discussion about the impact on people on fixed incomes, and not everybody living in Shimo and Monomoy in those homes has got the kind of money that people do that live right on the water. And I don't know how to get to that at that issue and get it out into the public and have a discussion about it, because I think it's going to be a significant issue for people.
Well, I guess I'm ignorant. So what happens? I mean, let's say you're living on a fixed income and you're presented with $100,000, $50,000.
Well, I can tell you what happened in the condos.
Well,
everybody they couldn't afford to put their property on the market, and they drove the prices down because there was so much property for sale.
But I guess I'm curious, in town of Nantucket, as a practical matter, the sewer goes by the house, the bill is $50,000, the homeowner can't, and is that homeowner's only option sell the house to raise the money, or does the town put a lien on that? I mean, what is the sort of the typical legal impact on someone who says, I have no money, I can't
If
pay
you
this?
apportion the betterment, there's automatically a lien put on the house for that anyway. If you apportion it, there's a first priority lien put on it. We're actually asking for town meeting to approve the language for the deferral of betterments for people who meet the requirements of Chapter 41A. As I explained previously to the Board of Selectmen, we currently have nobody that is in Chapter 41A, which is property tax deferrals. I suppose that if this was added, that people may come out. I don't know. The short answer is that if somebody didn't pay it, I guess it would go through the same process if they didn't pay their property taxes now, because it's added to the property tax bill. So
what if they don't decide they can't afford to hook up? They can't afford to hire the contractor, which are cash payments, and hook up to the system, and just, where's the town going to come out on that issue?
Well, if they didn't connect immediately, the only issue that if they were paying the betterment, the only issue we have is not adding as many sewer users, because don't forget, the betterment automatically goes, once the pipe's gone by your house in the project, that area is closed out. We would issue the betterment. So them not connecting or not being able to do that would just delay the increase in users into the enterprise fund. It wouldn't, unless, of course, they couldn't pay the betterment itself, and then that would be a different issue.
But realistically, we're trying to get people off septic systems because they're causing the pollution in the harbors, and then we make the financial burden so great that we encourage people not to get off the septic systems. I mean, I think we're chasing our tail on this issue.
I can help Brian, because I think the initial, Matt Fee, Selectman. I've been at this, as you guys know, for 12 years or so. I think the initial numbers that Brian has done are going to actually go to helping what you're talking about. I think if we go to the uniform code, it seems like places like Tashima, if we consider a 3-bedroom house, the number they're going to be expected to pay is going to be less than the system they'd have to put in if their septic fails. And they're going to have the advantage of not having to have pump outs and all the other maintenance and things. So I think I look at what we've been doing as a process, and it hasn't been easy, and it hasn't been, So I share some of David's concerns about wish we had started on this 9 months ago. But if the numbers hadn't been, we had some $350,000, $450,000 betterment numbers, that opened the town up to potential litigation. If we didn't treat a different project differently, then we would have had trouble. We would have had some people saying, why are they paying, $20,000 and I'm paying $350,000? So even though technically we probably could have done it on land value, I think the legal problems that would have arisen wouldn't have made sense. And I think sort of where we're heading now, and the numbers aren't 100% there yet, but where we're heading now might address some of the concerns that David has.
But have you, Matt, to me, the real nub here is going to be the secondary costs that everybody's going to have to absorb. And I mean, let's face it, they're going to be large.
Yeah, and I agree with that.
And because an awful lot of these areas, homes are set back from the roads. It's not like, going down India Street where, you got a 30-foot run of pipe, if that. You're going to have some fairly substantial pipe runs and excavation work that needs to be done. And, and I don't know what those numbers are, but it's pretty easy to see that they're going to be, could be fairly substantial. In some cases, maybe the same cost as the actual betterment themselves. And I don't see where people, particularly people on fixed incomes or, relatively modest incomes, are going to come up with the cash to do that.
Yeah, no, and I think there's going to be some issues, but I think, I think it's going to spread. I think the numbers are going to come down. It isn't going to be quite as, it's not going to be quite as onerous, I believe. And then it'll still be a question of the split. We're at 60-40 now. Maybe the selectmen go to 50-50. Who knows? I can't speak. I'm one of, I voted that way to follow the group. One of my big concern is this is something we have to do. We have to do it sooner rather than later. I don't think we would have gotten, even though I voted to put both in front of the town meeting, I don't think we would have gotten all the work and gotten the votes at town meeting. I think we would have had too many questions. So I think, bringing one now and the next one, if this is successful, soon after, I think is the right strategy. And, people have to realize we have to do it. And so what's the way to do it that's going to be politically acceptable, that's going to be as fair as it can be for people within the system and not within the system. And I think we're getting closer, and it'll be interesting.
Is it the intent for the selectmen to make known that the vote and the split for Schimmel and Monomoy is, the intent is that's the split that would follow on the subsequent projects?
Well, it has to be close to that. This is what town council explained to us. We can't say, we couldn't go 100% betterment on the rich guys in Monomoy and then turn around and do 100% on the tax base for, the people in Austin Farms, et cetera. You have to have some reasonableness. If you're going to charge something slightly different, there has to be an overriding reason. So if you're coming from Nantucket, maybe the split in Nantucket, if we did 60-40 here, maybe the split there would be 50-50 because we've got X amount of pipe, and you'd have to have some valid reason that's, that you couldn't be challenged on. So that was sort of, that's all part of what's trying to be figured out. It's not just the numbers, it's sort of the numbers and how are you going to present this and how are you going to be fair to both sides. But at this point, I feel I'm not feeling quite as. I'm feeling actually pretty good about where we are right now. Maybe I won't feel that way after we have a couple meetings 2 weeks from now. But right now, I feel like I feel good that Brian's on board doing the work he's doing. I feel like we've gotten good advice from legal counsel. Even though maybe we had less than good advice before, we've gotten good advice lately, and I think we're headed in the right direction. So.
Any questions?
Thanks.
I had another question for Brian. The email that went around that I think was this summer, I think Libby wrote, Libby, you wrote one. But anyway, my question is, town council also said that there was no good way to offer rebates or offsets to people who have recently invested in an upgraded or septic system. So that's that problem is still
That
there.
problem still exists. It's not. There's no way to do it. They essentially said there's nothing under the statute. You could request a home rule petition, but the likelihood of success is none.
One of the questions I had for them was exactly that one, and I sort of, maybe I heard it differently, but what I had heard was we could possibly set up a policy that says if someone has done something within the last 5 years, that will be considered a half a unit rather than a whole unit. So there might be some flexibility there. And he's still working on that. So that was one issue.
Just a couple of questions. I'm not sure if I heard an answer for David's question relevant to if the sewer goes by the house and the person is going to be incurring the betterment charge, does that happen when it goes by their house? Even though they may not be hooked up because they can't afford the hookup.
Right. So the betterment charge is assessed once the project is, as soon as possible after the project is completely closed out.
Okay.
And it typically goes on the next tax bill after the assessment is issued. And it always goes on the third and fourth quarters. It's required to go on the actual bills, which are the third and fourth quarters.
So do you think that we may incur some litigation by that person who can't afford to hook up? Have we thought about that as other communities, I'm sure, have broached that subject? Because, Kara, correct me if I'm wrong, the hookup based on DPW, you have the fees that you had mentioned in one of our meetings, may come close to $6,000 or $7,000 just for
construction.
Yeah.
The individual has a couple of opportunities to file for abatements. One is with the sewer commissioners. Assessors came to mind.
Yeah.
Sewer commissioners. And that's heard on an individual basis. The Board of Health has also expressed that they can also, the individual, the property owner, can request variance from the Board of Health for connection. And it was my understanding that they would entertain possible deferral of connection so that there's no user charges or no immediate construction charges for those who have recently put in a septic system. If we vote this in April, there will not be any shovel in the ground before 18-19. And the project has to be finished and accepted by the town before any betterments are assessed or any connections are made. So we could conceivably be another year out. So it's a long-term process, and the individuals will have already had the benefit of 3 or 4 or 5 additional more years of usage. The septic systems are only designed for 20 years. So if somebody put a septic system in 10 years ago, with an additional 5, you're nearing the end of the useful life of your system anyway. And the health director did do a count of the number of IA systems in the area, and the Nantucket Harbor Shimo area, he counted 23 in the whole watershed, and he's refining that into just the area for that's intended to be sewered. So there is the actuality or the practical side of the matter is that there's a number of years in progression before it gets put into place, and it tends to dovetail into the age of the system.
So I have a question for Karen.
Just as a follow-up, because it kind of leads into my next question, isn't it a litigious, slippery slope if we try to ask somebody to wordsmith or define what significant septic upgrade is? I mean, either we're doing a sewer project or we're not. I mean, who's going to make that determination? Granted, you can say it's 5 years, it's 10 years, it's 2 months old.
The only entity that can make that decision is the Board of Health, and they are charged with the ensuring that the systems work.
So if we're not putting a shovel in the ground for potentially a year, what's going to stop, as part of this promotion, those people from going out and installing a new Title V septic?
The Board of Health has anticipated that issue, and they have a process, an administrative consent order that they enter into with the individual, and based on the cost of the construction of a septic system, it's sort of an enforced savings account. The individual signs the ACO, puts money into this account, and if they decide tomorrow that they want to sell the house and need to install a new septic system, all of that money is available to them at any time. Or they can continue to pay into it, and it becomes a savings account that they can tap into for the construction of their connection.
Great. Thank you.
Greg?
Kara, just so it's clear, once the town accepts the system, it's installed and it's ready to go, Did I hear it was 6 months, that if you're on the street where there's a line, you have to tie in?
The Board of Health has a regulation that requires 6 months for connection in areas that have direct impact on the resource areas, the harbors, and 2 years for those areas outside. And most of the Nantucket Harbor Shimo area is within the harbor watershed, and the plus parcels, I have to look at the exact line, they're towards the back there. That's questionable as to whether it's 6 months or 2 years.
So, in point of fact, people will be required to tie in. So there is no, you cannot go 5 years without tying in.
No, the Board of Health has said that if they're in an area where they're required to connect within a certain period of time, they can come to the board and request a variance. And they will, the Board of Health will enter into an agreement with them saying, okay, it's for this number of years or whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's face it, we're putting a lot of burden on people. And there's really, even though maybe there's an appeal process, for all intents and purposes, it's not going to.
I think what's beneficial to note is the number of systems that we're talking about. It's under 20. And the Board of...
There are only 20 systems in Monomoy and Shimo?
That have been recently updated.
I know, but aren't we talking about all systems having to hook up within 6 months if they're in that area? In that area?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's considerably, it's everybody.
I was just commenting on the number that had been recently updated.
Kara, I don't know if we resolved the question I had last week about the connection fee, because we achieved the capacity for all these new connections, and I thought the capacity was calculated the one-third connection fee with the old connections. So I just thought by adding more connections, we'd dilute that connection fee.
We did look into the privilege fee calculation, and it was based on 2,300 new connections. When the Surfside Wastewater Treatment Plant was upgraded, it was anticipated that 2,300 new connections would be made. As of today, it's 1,500. So there are still a number of parcels that were originally anticipated that haven't been connected yet. Okay. And we have started to talk about what happens when we approach that number. What I did say last time was that the connection fee was $2,000, but in looking into the relationship with the Board of Health regulations, when the Board of Health requires somebody to connect within, I think it's, I have to get the number of years, but it's $500. So that 2,000 number drops to 500 within that required period, the 6 month or the 2 year period. So that does drop. And the privilege fee, we are approaching the point when that amount will be reached, the 2,300. So there's a couple moving parts there.
Okay. Any other questions?
I had another question for Brian. Do you know, Brian, have you crunched the numbers on how much smoothing will happen by going to the uniform compared to, so for example, the guy in Shimo paying $450, will that come down to $300 or $250? Or do you have an idea how much?
It'll substantially drop. Andrew is kind of reviewing the estimated number of connections, so he's supposed to get that to me before the end of the day tomorrow, so I can look at that to make sure that number, because that will create some fluctuation, either positive or negative, to that. It would, I think when I originally presented it using the uniform method, the betterment at 60/40 was around, I think, 65,000, which would be the creation of a sewer unit equivalent. Mm-hmm. So for some people it's going to drop substantially, other people it's going to rise substantially based on that. But that's just for the Nantucket Harbor Shimo area. Obviously, in the plus parcels it would be different. But we're reviewing to make sure that we have the estimated connections based on current zoning, because that's the way that it reads. So that number could change.
Okay.
Any questions? Seeing no more questions, I guess that concludes the debate for today, I guess, on our sewer project. Are we going to have a public hearing on Monday?
Yes.
Okay.
Public hearing is on Monday.
All right. Thank you. So, turn back. Sure.
Just checking our agenda. The date of our next meeting is Monday, February 8th. It is our public hearing for the entire warrant. John Giorgio will be here as well, and he'll be happy to answer questions on anything related to any of the warrant articles. In addition to the public hearing, Linnell, do you want to give me a little hint on what else we're doing Monday? That's it? All right, great. Okay. Do we need to put anything, so we're going to, do we have continuing the discussion on warrant articles on the agenda?
Just the public hearing.
Okay, so, Libby, can we talk about warrant articles on Monday? Usually we just have those, we have that as a kind of routine agenda item.
You want to add it to your agenda?
Yes. Okay. Yes, Peter.
Didn't we have the electrical aggregation on our
That
agenda
was,
for
Tuesday.
Tuesday?
Yeah.
Okay, it was moved to Tuesday. Okay, great.
And CRC is, well, we have the CRC scheduled? Tuesday? Okay. Yeah, we're waiting for something. I think Stephen said they're going to have their report and then for us to take a look at over the weekend and talk about it on Tuesday. Anything else to come before the meeting, the committee today? Is there a motion to adjourn? All those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Thank you.